Nietzsche believed that every human relationship carries within it a dance of invisible forces. What we call love, friendship, or partnership often amounts to nothing more than a subtle struggle for dominance, a game of wills disguised as affection. He didn't write to offer comfort, but to tear away the masks from what we value most. When you look at your relationship, do you see complicity or do you perceive a silent dispute? Could it be that behind gestures of tenderness lies an attempt to mold the other, to control them, to reduce them to a reflection of yourself? These questions may be uncomfortable, but Nietzsche invites us to face them without illusions, because if we don't understand the hidden power that governs our relationships, we remain prisoners of dynamics that drain our freedom. This script won't bring easy answers, but it will open clearings in a shadowy territory of the human soul. What if what you call love is merely the most sophisticated form of war? If this reflection touches something in you, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this journey of discoveries. Nietzsche said that life is the will to power. This means that in every gesture, in every glance, in every word, there exists a force that seeks to affirm itself, expand itself, dominate. We're not talking about crude power, like that of a tyrant who commands and subjugates. It's something much more subtle, almost imperceptible, but present in all forms of human relationship. Even in the silence of a couple looking at each other across the dinner table, even in the tender embrace between friends, there's an underground tension that organizes the scene: who influences whom, who yields, who leads, who obeys. The curious thing is that we almost never admit this. We like to think that love is pure, that friendship is selfless, that family is unity. Nietzsche, however, forces us to look without veils. Everything is crossed by the struggle of forces. A compliment can be a form of subtle domination, because whoever compliments places the other in the position of someone who needs validation. A gesture of care can hide the attempt to imprison, to make the other feel indebted. Even renunciation can be strategic. Whoever gives up may, deep down, be imposing guilt on the other. Imagine two people living together. One decides what will be served for dinner, chooses the evening's movie, defines the rhythm of daily life. The other, apparently more passive, accepts, agrees, yields. But behind this passivity, there may be an even deeper control. By always accepting, she silently molds the other's personality, transforms her into a permanent leader, places her in the role of decision provider. Submission becomes inverted power, because the first person comes to carry the weight of always guiding, while the other exercises dominion behind the scenes, remaining untouchable. Nietzsche didn't see this as something evil in the moral sense, but as inevitable. Life is struggle, and where there is life, there are forces that clash. Therefore, even in affection, there is confrontation. We don't perceive it because we learn to romanticize bonds, to cover with flowers what deep down is a silent battle. What he invites us to do is abandon this illusion, to perceive that loving is also fighting, that being in a relationship is entering a field of forces that will never be neutral. This idea may seem cruel, but it liberates. When you perceive that there is no absolute purity in relationships, that every gesture of closeness carries a power game, you begin to see beyond appearances. That friend who always advises you may not just be caring, but might be trying to guide you toward the path he himself considers superior. That person who always positions herself as a victim may be manipulating your guilt to obtain attention. And you yourself, when you believe you're just helping, may be imposing your vision, your will, your way of being. Power, therefore, is not just an external element, but the very breath of relationships. It's in everything we do, even in silences. The question is not whether power exists or not, but whether you're capable of recognizing it, naming it, facing it without fear. Nietzsche reminds us that closing our eyes to this is living in illusion. Perhaps now you're beginning to ask yourself in your current relationship, who really leads, you or the other? And to what extent is this leadership explicit or hidden? Who seems to dominate and who in reality manipulates from behind? These questions don't seek to destroy your certainties, but to tear away the masks that hide the true dynamic of your life. In the end, perhaps loving is learning to dance in this field of forces without denying its existence. Because, as Nietzsche would say, power is not something that corrupts love. It is the very invisible fabric that sustains the encounter between two wills. Affection always seems to us the territory of purity, of surrender, of emotional honesty. We speak of true love, of sincere friendship, of unconditional loyalty. But Nietzsche, with his cutting gaze, deconstructs this fantasy. He reminds us that behind sweet words and gestures of tenderness, there is an invisible machinery of forces in dispute. Affection, far from being a shelter of neutrality, is frequently the most effective disguise of power. Think of a couple where one always says, "I do everything for you." At first glance, it seems like love, dedication, altruism. But looking deeper, we perceive the trap. Whoever does everything creates a silent debt in the other, establishes a relationship of dependence. The one who sacrifices positions himself as martyr, and the martyr carries with him the weight of accusation. The moment something doesn't go as expected, the phrase is thrown like a knife, "After everything I did for you." Affection then reveals itself as currency of control, as a mask that hides the desire for dominion. Nietzsche would call this herd morality disguised as tenderness. Affection, when it presents itself as total renunciation, often amounts to nothing more than accumulated resentment. It's not love that gives freely, but love that expects return. It's not friendship that welcomes, but friendship that demands constant reciprocity. And when that return doesn't come, what was sweetness becomes poison. Another everyday example, the person who constantly offers advice, who always positions himself as guide or protector. In appearance, it's care. In reality, it's an affirmation of power. Whoever advises too much positions himself as the one who knows more, as the one who holds the truth. And by doing this, he reduces the other to someone who needs to be guided, as if he weren't capable of deciding for himself. It's affection that suffocates, that traps, that infantilizes. Nietzsche makes us realize that there is no innocent gesture. Even a hug can carry intentions. There are hugs that welcome, but there are hugs that dominate, that wrap the other in a prison of expectations. There are words of love that liberate, but there are also words that are golden chains, destined to mold the other according to what we desire. Affection, when it becomes a mask, is no less dangerous than explicit violence, because violence can be recognized, but manipulation hidden in tenderness is much harder to identify. And it's precisely because of this that so many people remain trapped in apparently sweet but deeply toxic relationships. They believe they're living love, when in reality they're being sucked into invisible power games. Jealousy, for example, frequently disguises itself as care. "I just want to protect you." But what hides behind this is the attempt at possession, the desire to transform the other into property. Emotional dependence, in turn, disguises itself as surrender. "I don't know how to live without you." But this discourse is nothing more than the trap of fragility, which traps the partner in the obligation to constantly sustain the other. Nietzsche, with his implacable vision, tears away this layer of illusions. For him, we must face the fact that many times what we call love is just a sophisticated form of selfishness. Not vulgar selfishness, but that which clothes itself in generosity, which disguises itself as altruism, which conquers through sweetness instead of force. And it's this masked selfishness that makes relationships so dangerous, because it destroys the other's freedom under the appearance of care. But there's still a more subtle mask, that of silence. How many times does affection hide in omission, in the lack of words, in the everything's fine said just to avoid conflict? This silence, which seems peaceful, is often a field of even more intense power. Because whoever remains silent directs the relationship without needing to expose himself. Silence forces the other to guess, to mold himself, to adjust, to avoid loaded with hidden meanings. It's a form of invisible but extremely effective control. If we look around, we'll see that almost all relationships are full of these masks. The co-worker who always shows himself available, but who accumulates resentment behind the scenes. The friend who always seems busy, but who demands to be sought out. The partner who says he loves unconditionally, but who demands silent obedience. Affection, when seen through Nietzsche's eyes, ceases to be a romantic ideal and becomes a territory of veiled war. The great question, then, is not just to identify these masks in the other, but also in ourselves, because we all, at some level, use affection as strategy. We all have already manipulated with tenderness, already controlled with care, already demanded disguised as affection. Recognizing this is painful, but also liberating, because only when we accept that our relationships are impregnated by these forces can we begin to transform them. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to abandon affection, but to unmask it. To have the courage to look at love without cultural filters, without the illusions of romanticism, without the veils of morality. Because only this way is it possible to build truly free bonds, where power is not denied, but recognized and balanced. Deep down, the question Nietzsche throws at us is disturbing. To what extent is the love you live actually love? And to what extent is it just a mask? To what extent is your sweetness surrender, and to what extent is it control? The answer to these questions can radically change the way you see every gesture of affection in your life. Nietzsche reminds us of something uncomfortable. Loving often doesn't mean caring for the other in their freedom, but desiring to possess them, mold them, make them an extension of ourselves. Love, in its most common version, carries within itself a longing for dominion. We want the other to belong to us, to be faithful to our expectations, to mold themselves to our needs. That's why love can easily transform into prison, even if ornamented with sweet words. Think about how we talk about relationships: my woman, my husband, my boyfriend. The possessive pronoun already denounces the logic. We don't say, the person who walks beside me, but mine, like someone who possesses an object. This form of language is not innocent. It reveals the underlying truth that Nietzsche exposes. Loving, in the common sense, is desiring to possess. It's transforming the other into emotional property, into territory from which we extract security, affection, recognition. Nietzsche saw in jealousy a clear expression of this desire for possession. Jealousy is not just fear of losing, it's also fury at the possibility that the other might exercise their freedom. The jealous person cannot bear that the partner exists outside their orbit, that they love, desire, or are interested in something that is not under their control. Jealousy is love transfigured into tyranny. And it's precisely this that Nietzsche wants to expose, that behind promises of fidelity and eternal vows, there is often a struggle for the other's submission. In everyday life, this desire for possession manifests in apparently small ways. The partner who insists on deciding what the couple will do, always in the name of what's best for us. The person who constantly criticizes the other's clothes, friends, habits, under the justification of helping to improve. Or even the one who demands constant proofs of love, as if it were impossible to trust without the other continuously molding themselves to their will. All of this is not care, but domination masked as tenderness. Nietzsche said that love deep down, is a battlefield between two wills to power. Each person tries to affirm themselves in the other, conquer space, impose their form, and what we call passion is often nothing more than the intoxication of this struggle. We love what challenges us, but we also seek to win this challenge, domesticate alterity. The risk is that, in this process, the other stops being a free subject and becomes reflection, mirror, puppet. The experience of jealousy illustrates this cruelly. When someone feels jealous, they don't suffer just from fear of losing love. They suffer because the other dares to be independent, dares to have a life that doesn't revolve exclusively around the one who desires them. The jealous person wants to be the total universe, wants to reduce the partner to a planet orbiting their gravity. Love, then, reveals itself as the most sophisticated form of domination, a domination that disguises itself as surrender, but which deep down is absolute control. Nietzsche doesn't romanticize this. He doesn't say it's ugly or beautiful, right or wrong. He says it is. Life is struggle, and love, being part of life, is struggle too. The question is whether we recognize this struggle or hide it under fantasies. Whoever loves wanting to dominate, but believes they're just caring, is condemned to suffocating relationships. Whoever perceives that love carries this impulse of possession can perhaps transform it into something more conscious, freer, more authentic. A common example is that of parents and children. How many parents say they love, but this love is, in reality, the attempt to mold children according to their own desires. They choose careers, friends, even loves, justifying everything with the phrase, "It's for your own good." Nietzsche would see there the clearest form of love as domination. The child is not loved in their singularity, but the projection one wants to impose on them. The child becomes mirror, not free being. The same happens in many couples. Loving deep down can mean desiring that the other adjusts to our ideal. We want the partner to be as we dream, not as they are. And when they don't correspond, resentment arises, accusations, pain. Love, then, shows its tyrannical face. Nietzsche, however, doesn't condemn love. He redesigns it. For him, it's only possible to truly love when we renounce the temptation of possession, when we accept that the other is other and not our extension. This is rare, almost impossible, because it goes against our will to power. But it's also the only path to a love that doesn't imprison. And here's the most provocative point: if love is, in essence, domination, will we ever manage to love without possessing? Is it possible to desire the other without wanting to mold them? Nietzsche leaves us before this question without easy answer, like a mirror that returns our own shadow. Deep down, perhaps loving is always a tension between freedom and dominion. The question is not to deny this struggle, but to recognize it and decide which side we're on. Do we want a love that imprisons or a love that liberates? Nietzsche said that human beings constantly seek to affirm themselves, give form to the chaos of their existence, and project into the world what they believe themselves to be. This need doesn't disappear in relationships. On the contrary, it's in them that it intensifies. Loving, for many, doesn't mean finding the other in their difference, but transforming the other into a reflection, into a mirror that confirms our own image. The partner stops being a free subject and becomes an instrument of validation. When we fall in love, frequently what we see in the other is not the person themselves, but the possibility of confirming our own beliefs and desires. The one who calls himself romantic looks for someone who accepts his idealization. The one who calls himself protective seeks someone who needs to be cared for. The one who feels fragile desires someone who will carry him. In all these cases, the other is not recognized as alterity, but as projection. Love transforms into a stage where we act out ourselves. Nietzsche denounced this tendency as a form of disguised narcissism. Love, in this sense, is not encounter, but appropriation. We don't love difference, but similarity. We don't welcome the unexpected, but we domesticate the other so they fit our molds. And when the other resists, when they show themselves different, when they break the illusion of mirror, the relationship enters crisis. Resentment arises because what we called love was not love, but a secret pact. Be what I need you to be so that I can recognize myself in you. This mechanism appears clearly in the silent expectations we place on our partners. We want them to speak in a certain way, think in a certain form, have certain values, correspond to an idealized image. Every time the other fails to maintain this reflection, we feel frustration. It's as if we were saying, "I love you, but only to the extent that you confirm who I am." The other becomes a tool of self-affirmation, not a free subject. In everyday life, this can be seen in apparently banal situations. A person who considers herself generous may expect the partner to reciprocate this generosity in exactly the same way, as if they were a reflection. When this doesn't happen, generosity transforms into accusation. "I would do this for you. Why don't you do it for me?" Another person who prides herself on her independence may want the partner to also be independent and get irritated when he demonstrates need for support. It's not about loving singularity, but seeking mirrors that reinforce our self-image. Nietzsche saw there a profound danger love when reduced to mirroring annals alterity. The other stops existing in their own potency and becomes a shadow molded by our expectations. And this is, at the same time, more comfortable and more destructive. Comfortable because we don't need to deal with the unknown, destructive because we kill the other's freedom and condemn the relationship to silent stagnation. The problem is that this desire for mirror is not conscious. Few admit wanting only reflections. On the contrary, we usually dress this desire in noble words. "I want someone who matches me. I want someone who completes me. I want someone who understands who I am." These phrases, which seem innocent, reveal the same logic. We don't seek the other, but ourselves reflected in the other. It's selfishness masked as love. Nietzsche, in his radical critique, doesn't spare even the most idealized romantic love. For him, many of the great love stories are nothing but stories of mirroring, of will to possess, of transformation of the other into reflection. He forces us to ask, when I say I love, am I loving that person's singularity, or am I loving the way they confirm me? The pain of many relationships is born exactly at this point. While the other confirms our image, everything seems harmony. But when they show themselves different, when they decide to be themselves, when they break the mirror's frame, the relationship shakes. The accusation arises, "You changed." But did the other change, or did they simply stop being reflection and begin to exist as subject? The drama is not in the change, but in the fall of illusion. Nietzsche invites us to abandon this game. He calls us to love not the mirror, but the abyss. To love someone in their difference, in their strangeness, in their freedom. This is difficult love because it requires enduring that the other is not what we want. It requires renouncing the temptation to project and accepting the risk of true encounter. Loving without transforming the other into mirror is loving without guarantees. It's opening oneself to the unknown, to the unpredictable, to what escapes our control. It's abandoning the comfort of seeing oneself reflected and accepting the anguish of seeing the other exist by themselves. And paradoxically, it's precisely in this risk that love becomes more authentic, more vital, more transformative. Nietzsche believed that only in this type of love is true creation possible, because when two individuals meet without trying to imprison one another in molds, something new emerges, something that doesn't belong to either of them in isolation. It's a space of shared freedom, where power is not negation, but joint affirmation. In the end, the Nietzschean question echoes as a personal challenge. Do you love the other as they are, or as reflection of yourself? This question, which seems simple, is capable of dismantling the security of any relationship, because by answering it honestly, we discover whether we're living love or just disguised narcissism. After diving into the shadows of love, seeing in it domination, mirrors and power games, inevitably the question arises, is there a way out? If every bond is crossed by invisible disputes, if affection is full of masks, and if love transforms into possession, how is it possible to build something that isn't just prison disguised as tenderness? Nietzsche didn't believe in easy solutions, but he believed in the possibility of liberation, not in the sense of eliminating power, but in transforming it into consciousness and creation. The first key lies in recognizing the uncomfortable truth. Power is not the enemy of love, it's part of it. Denying this is remaining blind. Accepting it is beginning to free oneself. When we perceive that every gesture carries will to power, we stop deceiving ourselves with romantic illusions. Love stops being fantasy of purity and becomes real experience, marked by tensions, but also by possibilities of growth. Nietzsche teaches us that it's better to face hard truth than live in sweet lie. Imagine a couple in which both openly recognize their needs for control and influence. Instead of masking jealousy as care, they name it as fear of losing. Instead of hiding accusation under the mantle of sacrifice, they assume it as desire for recognition. This simple act of unmasking is already liberating, because it takes the relationship from the terrain of manipulation and places it in the terrain of consciousness. Power continues to exist, but no longer as hidden current. It becomes part of the dance. Nietzsche believed that it's only possible to love more authentically when one assumes their own will to power. This means recognizing that we also desire to mold, we also seek to dominate, we also use affection as mask. Assuming this is not condemning oneself, but freeing oneself from hypocrisy. Liberation begins when we stop demanding from love what it cannot give: absolute purity, neutrality, perfect balance. Real love is made of forces that clash, and it's in this clash that life intensifies. Another key to liberation lies in the capacity to endure difference. Loving cannot be transforming the other into mirror, but accepting their radical alterity. This requires courage, because it's much more comfortable to live with reflections than with strangeness. But Nietzsche said that true life only happens when we face the abyss, when we risk ourselves in the unknown. The same applies to love. Freeing oneself means accepting that the other will not be exactly as we want, that they will not always confirm us, that they will have their own will and their own path. This acceptance opens space for creator love, instead of imprisoning love. Instead of reducing the other to the function of completing us, we can see them as journey companion, someone with whom we share the experience of affirming life in its intensity. At this point, love stops being contract and becomes encounter. Not encounter of two halves, but of two whole potencies that decide to walk together, not out of necessity, but by choice. Nietzsche also points to another form of liberation, transforming resentment into creative force. Often, when love doesn't correspond to our expectations, we accumulate hurt and become prisoners of resentment. This generates guilt, manipulation, endless accusations. Freeing oneself means transforming this energy into something affirmative. Instead of asking why the other doesn't correspond, we can ask how we can grow from this experience. Love stops being place of accusation and becomes space of personal transformation. In everyday life, this can mean changing how we react to frustrations. When the partner doesn't act as we expect, instead of blaming or manipulating, we can accept that they are free and that their choice is part of the reality we need to learn to affirm. This is not resignation, but strength. Because only the strong can love without imprisoning. Only the strong can say, "I love you not because you complete me, but because you exist in your own potency, and I choose to walk beside you." Nietzsche believed that true liberation in love requires an active posture toward life, not waiting for the other to give us meaning, but creating meaning together, not demanding that the other save us, but walking with them in the challenge of living without guarantees. Loving in this horizon is an act of courage, not need. And here's the most radical provocation: perhaps it's only possible to truly love when we don't need love. When we don't seek in it salvation, completeness, or justification for our existence. Whoever is whole can love without imprisoning. Whoever already affirms themselves can find in love not a mirror, but a partner of creation. Liberation, then, is not absence of power, but power lived consciously, creatively, affirmatively. It's the capacity to transform love into space of mutual growth, and not into field of silent domination. Deep down, Nietzsche invites us to a type of love that few dare to live: a love without chains, a love that doesn't deny struggle but transforms it into dance, a love that doesn't kill the other's freedom but celebrates it. We reach the most delicate point of Nietzschean reflection on relationships, the possibility of love without chains. After recognizing the power game, the masks of affection, domination, and the tendency to transform the other into mirror, the inevitable question arises: is it possible to love freely? Or are we condemned to eternally repeat the same dynamics of possession and control? Nietzsche didn't believe in emotional paradises. For him, love will never be a totally pure space, because life is made of tensions and disputes. But this doesn't mean we're condemned to prison. The difference lies in how we choose to live these forces. Loving without chains is not loving without power. It's loving while recognizing power and transforming it into creation, not submission. Loving without chains means, above all, loving without illusions, not expecting from the other what they cannot give: salvation, completeness, eternal guarantees. When we enter a relationship seeking to fill our voids, we inevitably create dependence and control. The partner becomes compensation tool, not free subject. Nietzsche invites us to reverse this logic, not loving to fill, but loving to overflow. Loving not from lack, but from abundance. Imagine someone who already affirms themselves as individual, who finds meaning in their own existence, who doesn't need the other to justify their life. This person, when they love, doesn't do it to complete themselves, but to share. Love stops being prison because it doesn't spring from necessity, but from choice. The partner is not mirror, not crutch, not property, they are journey companion. This is love without chains, rare, but possible. In everyday life, this translates into small attitudes. When the other expresses their difference, instead of reacting with resentment or attempt to mold them, we choose to affirm this difference. When the impulse of jealousy arises, instead of transforming it into tyranny, we assume that it springs from our fear and not from the other's guilt. When we feel like accusing instead of manipulating, we decide to clearly name our needs without masking them. These are simple gestures, but they open space for more authentic relationships. Nietzsche knew that this type of love requires strength. Only the strong endure that the other be free. Only the strong can love without transforming the other into property. Weakness seeks chains, strength seeks freedom. Therefore, loving without chains is a spiritual and ethical challenge, not just emotional. It's a constant exercise of self-overcoming, of abandoning illusions, of courage in the face of difference. It's also creator love. When two people meet without trying to imprison one another, a fertile space emerges where something new can be born. It's not just about living together, but creating together, creating forms of life, of joy, of resistance to emptiness. Nietzsche saw in free love a possibility of affirming life in its plenitude, a space where two wills to power meet, not to annul each other, but to potentialize each other. This love, however, is not comfortable. It requires dealing with the constant risk of the other's freedom. They can leave, can choose another path, may not correspond to our expectations. But it's precisely in this risk that lies its greatness. Loving without chains is accepting that nothing is guaranteed, that everything is flow, that each day needs to be chosen anew. It's a permanent bet on life and not on security. Nietzsche would provoke us to ask, do you really desire love without chains? Or do you prefer the false security of possession? Because loving freely is risky, requires courage. It's much easier to live relationships based on control and dependence, even if they suffocate us. Loving without chains is swimming against the current of culture, against romantic ideals, against social expectations. It's a choice of few, but it's also the only choice that can generate truly transformative relationships, because only in this space of freedom and creation does love stop being mask and become potency. Loving without chains is, ultimately, loving as affirmation of life, and not as escape from it. It's loving the other not because they fit our molds, but because they exist in their own singularity. In the end, Nietzsche invites us to an intimate revolution, abandoning love that imprisons and daring to live love that liberates. A love without guarantees, but full of vitality. A love that doesn't kill difference, but celebrates it. A love that doesn't feed on illusions, but on courage. And here remains the final question, which may accompany you far beyond this script. Are you ready to love without chains? We've reached the end of this journey through the shadows of love in Nietzsche's light. We've seen that behind affection and tenderness, there exist invisible forces that fight for dominion. We've discovered that many times we use masks of care and sacrifice to hide desires for control. We've perceived that love can transform into domination, into mirror, into prison disguised as tenderness. But we've also glimpsed the possibility of liberation, a love without chains, based on the courage to recognize power and transform it into creation, not submission. Nietzsche doesn't offer us comfort but lucidity. He invites us to abandon romantic illusions and face love as it really is, a field of forces, of risks, of tensions, and precisely because of this, an opportunity for growth. Loving without chains is difficult, requires strength, requires courage, but it's also the only way to live a love that liberates instead of imprisoning. And now, I leave you with a question that's not simple to answer. What belief about love has imprisoned you the most until today? Share your answer in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. I want to hear your voice in this deep reflection. If this content touched you, like it, subscribe to the channel, and continue with us in this community that dares to think about the human in its depth, without masks, without illusions. Thank you for being part of this journey. Here, philosophy is not distant theory, but a flame that illuminates and burns within us.